welcome to my fourth video of Introduction to C#. Nice to see you again. Okay, in this lecture, I want to talk about modifiers. Okay, so I guess you may have seen these keywords here: public, private, protected, internal, static, in front of methods or in front of variables. And public, private, protected, and internal are called access modifiers. And static is different. It is called static modifier. So in this lecture, I want to talk about these, but because this is an introduction lecture, I don't talk about protected and internal modifiers. So I want to talk about public modifier, public access modifier, and private access modifier, and static modifier. Okay, so let's begin. So here is the student's application we have built in the last third lecture. So just to recap, what we have done so far is we created a student class, and inside the student class there's three properties: name property, major property, and GPA. And we created two objects from the student class, student 1 and student 2. So student 1 has name Jim, and his major is business, and he has 2.8 GPA. And student 2, his name is John, and his name is Art, and he has 3.5 GPA. And in the last lecture, I printed out the property, name, major, and GPA. So these properties belongs to the object, not to the class, but to the object. So we can only access to them after we created the object. And here, I changed the value. I changed the value of student 1.GPA to 3.2. So it was 2.8, but now it is changed to 3.2. So in this code, in the last line, student 1.GPA, it is 3.2. So the first line, the first student 1.GPA, it yields 2.8, but this line yields 3.2. So this is what we achieved in the last lecture. Okay, so in this lecture, as I told you, I first want to introduce you to the static. So we have static here in the main method. Main method is, as I told you, the method that is called at the very beginning, and it has static. Static means we don't have to create the object to use it. Okay. In the class, I told in the last lecture, we have to create an object to access to the class members. Members mean property or method. So if we want to use a method, we have to create an object. But this main method is special because it is called at the very beginning. So we cannot create a program object. So it is called static. So static method can be called without making an object. And it is the same for property. So let me first show you an example of static property using this example, using this student's app example. So one thing we want to do in this application is we want to count the number of students. So we have created 2 students, but we can create many. We can create students 3, 4, 5, and so on. And say we want to count the number of the students. So we need a variable to count student variable. And this variable should belong to the student class because it is counting the number of students. But it should not belong to each student each student. It should not be belong to an object, but it should be belong to the class itself because it counts the numbers. So in this case, we can use static property. Okay, so here at the top of the class student, we declare three properties: name, major, and GPA. They are all public, but not static. Okay, I will talk about public later, so let's forget it right now. So name, major, and GPA have not static modifier, but now we want to add a static property. So public and static, and we want to count the number of students, so it is an integer, int, and the identifier, so let's say count students. Yes. So this is a static property. And because we want to count the number of students, we can use this constructor. So this constructor, public student constructor, is called every time an object is created. So we can do it like this: count student plus equal 1. Plus equal 1 means add 1 to the current value of current students and replace the current students by that number. So it's simply add 1. Okay. So when it's called, every time this constructor is called, it adds 1 to the current students variable. So we can use this to count the students. So let's go back to program.cs. So we can click here, or we can just use Control and Tab to switch between files. Okay, so press Control Tab and go back to program.cs, and I want to console the right line, the count numbers. So first, I want to count numbers before creating an object. So console the right line, and static properties can be accessed by the class itself. So I first write student, the class name, student, and dot count students. So this is a difference between a class property and object property. The class property, which have a static modifier, can be used like this: class name dot variable, not class name dot property. Yes. And I have to talk about another thing here. I do not declare the initial value here, count students. When I don't declare initial value to an integer, it is set to 0. The default value of integer is 0, so it's 0 here. Of course, I can do like this. This is the same. Okay, so to make it simple, I'll just leave it here. And after I have created the student 1, I want to do the console the right line again. So this should be 1 here. And after I create the second student, I also do the same thing here. And I want to delete the 3 lines here, the 5 lines here from the last lecture. Okay. So let's see what happened. So press start. It is now launching. Here this is the console. Here it is. We have 0, 1, and 2, and this is what we expected. So 0 is from the first count students, and 1 is from here, and the 2 is from here. Okay, so this is static variable. It can use outside the object. It can use directly from the class student. And the difference is here. We have static modifier in front of the identifier, count student. Name, major, and GPA have no static modifier here. So we can't access to them by the student class. So for example, student dot, in the box below, we don't have name, we don't have GPA, and we don't have major here. We only have count students. Okay. Next, I want to talk about public and private. And public and private, to talk about public and private, I want to use them in the function context. So let me talk about function. I would create a different lecture about function. So in this lecture, I want to use a very simple function. And a function is something we input, and the function outputs something. So input something and output something. So this is a function. We pass in a value, and the function returns some other value. This is a very basic feature of function. So for simplicity, let's create a very, very simple function. So just add two numbers. So this function is not related to the student's application, but I want to make a very simple application here. Okay, so inside the class program, but outside the student method. So here, I want to create a very simple function. So static, so it is static function, static, and it return an integer and add two values. This is the name of the function, so it can be anything. Add two values. And the parenthesis, inside the parenthesis, we write the input or parameters. So I want to add two values. So the first parameter is int, and the second parameter is also an int. So this function have two parameters, two inputs, and the functionality should be inside the curly braces. So return a plus b. Very simple function. Return a plus b. Yes. So this function have a static modifier. So let's create other functions which have different modifiers. So I want to create a total of 4 functions. Okay, the first function have no modifier, so just int, and I want to call this add values 1 function, and the second function is static int, and I want to call it add values 2 function, and the third method is another way of saying function. The third one, I want to use the private modifier here. Private. And the last one is public. Public with the combination of static, and private with the combination of static. Yes. And this is add values 3. And the last public method is add two values 4. First, let me talk about public. There are two values 4 function. Public, as its name suggests, can be used from anywhere, from outside the class, anywhere in the program. It is accessible anywhere from the program. So for example, this is program class, but we can use it from the student class. So program. So because it is a static function, we have to first call program and dot and add program dot. Oh no, I have to do it inside here. Program dot add two values 4. Okay, so we can access to the add two values function because it is public. We cannot access to the others because they are private. For example, when I press dot, it only shows add two values 4. It doesn't show add two values 1, 2, and 3 because they are private. We can access to it. The same thing will happen if we define a function inside the class students. If we define a public function in the class student, we can access to it from the program class. And if we define a function which is private in this student class, we cannot access from the program class. Okay, so this is the public modifier. So next we have the private modifier. So private modifier can be accessed inside the class. So let's do it here. Okay, so we actually don't use the program here. So just delete it. So I just write it to check whether I can access it. So now I want to delete it. Can go back to program.cs, and here if I press add, I can access to the add two values 2 function and 3 function and 4 function because they are either private or public. Yes, 3 is private, so we can access from the same class program. And we can also access the add two values 4 function because it is public. So because it is public, it can be accessed from inside the class or from outside the class. Okay, so this is the private. And the last one, as you may be aware, is private. Okay, so we can't access to add two values 2 from the student class, but we can access to it from here. Add two values 2. So if you do not declare access modifier, it is set to the most restricted area. It depends on the context, it depends on the program, but in C# and in this case it is private because private is the most restricted case here. It can be only accessed to from this class. So private, the static int add two values 2 is the same as this one. So add two values 2 without the private modifier, and add two values 3 with the private modifier is the same, exactly the same modifier. Okay, so let's see the functionality here. So to use this function, so this is not a modifier, but I want to show you a very basic image of function here. So as I told you, I want to create another lecture. Maybe it is the lecture 5, but I want to show you a very basic feature of a function here. So let's declare two integers here. So int, so it is a temporary variable, so let's call int temp a equals 10, and int temp b equals 20. And as I told you in the last lecture, this int can be var temp a and var temp b. Yes, and add two values. So let's use add two values, and we pass two integers, so temp a and temp b. Yes, and I want to console.write line, so CW and press 2 tabs, and add two values, put this function inside parentheses. Yes. So maybe this yields 30. So let's start. Yes, we have 30. So this is a function, a very basic function. Yes. Okay. So yes, so that's it for today's lecture. So just to recap, first I introduce you to the concept of static. And static is this modifier used in the class, used inside the class. And when we use static, either a static variable, static property, or a static method, these belong to the class itself. We do not have to create an object to use them. So in this example, first I have created a count student property, and it has a static modifier here. So to use it, I call directly from the student class. So here, student.countStudents. So this is an example of static property. Okay, and in contrast to the static property, the name, major, and GPA belongs to the object. So I can't do like student.GPA. I have to use the student property. I have to use, for example, student1. Student1 dot student1 dot student1 dot, yes, student1 GPA, major, name, and name. These variables belong to the object. Yes, and after that I introduce you to the concept of private and public using a very simple function. So, public modifier is a modifier which states that the function or the property can be accessed from anywhere outside the class. But the public modifier states that the method or the property can be accessed just from inside the class. Okay. Oh, I forget to add two values 1. Oh, this is a tricky one. So, okay, it's not the end of this lecture. So I want to use this here. So it is not static. And because it is not static, I have to create an object before I use it. So let's do it here. So this is inside the program class. So first I have to make a program object. So let's say var program1 equals new program. Yes. So I have created a program1 object from the program class. So after that, I can use this object, program1 object, to access add two values 1. Yes. So this is why. This is because we don't have a static modifier in front of add two values 1. So we have to make an object to access to it. So in the main method and in the same class below the main method, so in this case program class, this is useless. We don't do this here because var program1 new program doesn't make any sense. So this type of non-static method is used in a student, should be used in the student class, and I show you an example in the next lecture. So inside the program class, we should use either of these three types. So static or private static, so these are the same, and the public static. So basically we have two options. So private static or public static methods below the program class. Okay, so this is the last one I introduced you in this lecture. So without the static. So here I have to create a object to access to this function. And this should be used in a different class, for example, student class. And I'll show you this in the next lecture. Okay, so that's it for today. And thank you for listening. And I want to see you in the next lecture. And until then, happy C# coding. Bye-bye.